Hi guys, welcome to my first impressions of blink-182's new album, California. I said I was going to wait until the album came out, but it actually leaked yesterday, so I decided to listen to the album since I've bought it, so it's not like I'm just downloading it and listening to it, so yeah, my opinions on the album are basically pretty much my worst fears for the album. I was afraid that most of the songs would sound the same and they wouldn't have much variety other than the singles, and yeah, I was kind of right. A lot of the songs do sound the same, but really my biggest problem with it is that it doesn't sound like Blink-182. I don't have a problem with them experimenting, trying something new, moving on and having a new sound, but I have a problem with them doing that to sound more commercially friendly. A lot of the time when I was listening to this album, I was thinking back to some of the songs from All Time Low's Future Hearts album, which I did not like. I did a review of it last year. Many of the tracks sound like that, which isn't really a surprise since the producer John Feldman produced their album along with 5 Seconds of Summer's, both their albums, and Vices and Virtues by Panic at the Disco. So I don't really know what I expected, seeing he was, producing the album, although I guess he was in the band Goldfinger, so they were a pretty good punk band, so I guess I was expecting maybe something a little bit different, but no. For this album, they said that they were trying to get it to sound like classic Blink and go back to sort of their 90s sound. They didn't do that at all with this album. This sounds as modern as possible. It's so overly produced. Every single track, I was listening to it and there's loads and loads of different weird sounds that just don't fit in. And I don't have a problem with them adding loads of production in. It's just, I don't think it works on this album. The album is 16 tracks long. Out of that 16 tracks, I'd say I enjoy 6. That is not good. This is my favourite band of all time. I should love all 16 tracks. I shouldn't just listen to it and go, I only like 6. So, for me, the first 4 tracks are the best on the album. They're Cynical, Bored to Death, She's Out of Her Mind, and Los Angeles. Cynical is actually a really, really good opening. I listened to it and I was just like, okay, this could actually be something different. It sounded very fast and aggressive. It was very much pop punk, and I actually got really excited by that because that song is actually really, really solid. The instrumentation and everything's really good, and even Matt Skiba's vocals I actually really liked on that track. Bored to Death, of course, I've done a review about it. I do like that track. It's not amazing, but I do like it. She's Out Her Mind, I don't really remember too much, but I remember enjoying it. It does sound very much sort of like how Rabbit Hole and No Future did. It sounds very much similar to Bored to Death. But Los Angeles is actually one of the more different tracks on the album. This is one of the moments where I was listening and going, this sounds like Future Hearts. That song is so overly produced and it's not punk at all. It's just outright pop rock. It's got a lot of hip-hop influences as well in it, which I was not expecting, and I think that's one of the only tracks on the album that has a more pop sound that I actually enjoyed, where I thought it's not a bad song for what it is. I would have preferred it to be heavier, more rock-based, but for what it was, I didn't mind it. Apart from that, pretty much every other track on the album sounds almost identical to each other. I don't really remember much of the album. Most of the songs kind of just blend together. I know there's a couple that I really, really don't like. I thought Sober was awful. I thought Left Alone was also not good. San Diego basically sounds almost identical to Los Angeles, but a more rock version of that. It sounds very, very similar chord progression and stuff wise. And there weren't really any standout tracks where I listened to it and thought, this is amazing, this is one of the best things I've heard from the band in ages. The album did not blow me away. I listened to it, and all throughout I was left really, really bored. Just, it kind of felt like I was just listening to it and just trying to get through it because it was Blink, and I just had to do it because they're my favourite band. There was never a moment where I was really, really enjoying it and I was like, I'm really enjoying this album, I'm looking forward to where it goes next. There's never a moment like that. There's tracks that are good, but there's never a moment where I was just like, this is perfect, this is one of the best songs I've heard of them from a while, anything like that. There's a few tracks that I think are decent but not amazing. Like, there's a song called Home Is Such a Lonely Place. Going back to the Future Hearts sound, this sounds very much like Missing You / Tidal Waves. That really, it's the only slow song on the album. And yeah, it does sound like those two all-time low tracks. And yeah, it's not great. I guess it's catchy. I didn't hate it, but I think compared to some of their other slow songs, in fact, compared to all their other slow songs, this just does not cut it. Like, compared to, think back to some of their other old like slower songs, like Adam's song, Stay Together for the Kids, I Miss You. They were much better, had so much more emotion, lyrically were much better. And weren't as overly produced as this track. I really don't have a problem with tracks being overly produced, and I honestly don't even have a problem with bands making a transition from pop or rock, rock, pop punk or rock or anything like that, into more pop sounds. Like, I liked Paramore's self-titled album quite a bit. I of course really liked Panic at the Disco's Death of a Bachelor. I did a review of that earlier this year. So I don't have a huge problem with it. But the difference with those albums is that they made those sounds but actually kept writing decent songs and maybe even improved their songwriting abilities a little bit. Whereas on this album they haven't done that at all. A lot of the songs are catchy, not all of them. A lot of them do sound almost identical to each other and don't really stand out, or really, I can't really like put them apart or anything. But yeah, there are a few catchy songs. That there's never a moment where I think, like, there's not a single track on the album that I think is perfect. Like, every single track, even the worst tracks, have something that I enjoy in them. Like, a bit of instrumentation or something, or maybe a melody or something. But there's not a single track where I enjoy every little bit of it. Every single track I have at least one problem with, which isn't good. Like, not a single Blink album before has been like that. Like, maybe there's been a couple tracks where I've had problems with them, but for the most part there's always tracks that I love and don't have a single problem with. Whereas on this album there are many of those. In fact, most of the album I have, actually no, as I said, all the album, every single track I have a problem with. I'm trying to think of some of the other tracks I enjoy. There's actually a really good song which I feel like if the album all sounded like that, this could have been a really solid album, called The Only Thing That Matters, which is much louder, much more pop punk than the rest of the album, similar to Cynical. And there's a track called California, which is the second to last track, which does start off really slow and then explodes towards the end, which is decent. Like, I didn't hate that track, and I think it would have been a decent ending track. Of course they have Bohemian Rhapsody straight afterwards, which is a joke song, which is terrible. Both the joke songs on this album are terrible. But yeah, California is kind of, would have been a good like final track. I guess you can kind of look at Bohemian Rhapsody as more of a prologue or something. But yeah, there aren't really any standout tracks apart from those ones I've mentioned, like Kings of the Weekend, Teenage Satellites. I don't really remember any of them. They kind of just blended together. Kind of same with Left Alone, but that one I actually remember throughout thinking this was not a good song. So yeah, I think that's really all I have to say about the album. It's not great. Like, if there's one good thing I can say about it, is it's the best Simple Plan album I've heard. Like, it does sound very much like Simple Plan at times, like that incredibly overly commercialized, overly produced pop punk that Simple Plan have, where instead of actually writing good music, they care more about writing incredibly cliched music that will appeal to as many people as possible, which they've done with this album. They've kind of sold their souls in a little bit. They haven't tried to create an album with songs that are really, really great or really, really well written or anything. They've just tried to create songs that are catchy and that people can listen to and they may enjoy. There's nothing stand out, there's nothing that blows me away about any of the tracks. It just kind of is boring. It's just not great. There's some good instrumentation on the album, like Mark Hoppus, his bass lines on this track, the whole album, his bass lines are fantastic. There's many moments where he's just playing bass by himself where I was just like, okay, this is actually really good. And of course Travis Barker is fucking insane on the drums. Like, there's not a single track where I didn't think his drum tracks were amazing. And Matt Skiba, his vocals aren't terrible. There's a few tracks where I liked his vocals, but the problem I have is it's kind of hard to distinguish between Mark and Matt's voice a lot of the time. Like, they sound very, very similar, so I don't know a lot of the time who's singing. And I honestly, as much as I'm not a huge fan of Matt Skiba's voice or anything, I would have appreciated to see him take the lead a little bit more on some of these songs. Like, I don't think there's a single song where he sings full lead vocals. It's pretty much just Mark throughout the whole album, which for a long time I was saying that I hope this new album is basically just Mark singing all the tracks. But honestly, I think if they're going to replace Tom, this new guy could at least bring something to the table and at least have a huge input into the songs and at least put his voice in there a bit more instead of kind of just playing guitar. He seems to kind of just be doing like what Mark Hoppus would do if he could play guitar as well at the same time and stuff like that. Also, there's problems I have with the production and stuff. Like, I have a problem with everyone's vocals. Like, there's so much pitch correction on this album. I know a lot of people have been complaining about people who say there's too much auto-tune or anything, but there is loads of pitch correction on this album. I don't have a problem with using pitch correction if you just use it a tiny bit. Like, I'm a musician myself, so if I use pitch correction, it's only if I've recorded something and I love the take and I don't think I can recreate it, but there's a tiny bit that I fucked up in, like maybe a tiny bit I sing a little bit too low or something. That's the only time I think it's acceptable. Otherwise, you shouldn't really use it. For this whole album, every vocal line is covered in pitch correction, and it just sounds so unnatural and so fake. Like, I can't complain too much about people using pitch correction because I love like Neighborhoods and stuff like that, and I know Tom DeLonge uses it a lot, but I don't know, I don't think it works with Mark. I actually prefer him singing more naturally, because on this album it just does not sound right. Nothing sounds real. All the vocals sound really fake and artificial. So yeah, I'm honestly really disappointed by this album. I'm still going to be doing my in-depth review where I go through every single track, which will be out in a couple of weeks. And maybe when I listen to it a few more times, maybe my score will go up. Maybe I'll prefer it more. But honestly, I don't ever see me loving this album. I think I'm always going to have big problems with it. So for now, from my first impressions, I'd honestly give this like a 5 out of 10. Like, that's not good, because I think I'd give every other Blink album like 9s or even most of them 10s. So for that to be such a huge drop, it's a huge shame and really disappointing. But if you like the album, I'm glad. Enjoy it. Enjoy what I tried and couldn't do, because I really did try to like this album. Like, I even tried to pretend I wasn't listening to Blink and just tried to enjoy the album for what it was. But I don't know, maybe it's just because in the back of my head there's always going to be that feeling that this is my favourite band, and that this is such a huge step back from what they've done before, and some of the things that make them my favourite band are just not there with this new album. So yeah, it's a huge disappointment for me. I can kind of see why people would like it, but I don't know, a lot of me does feel kind of confused. I think a lot of people, it's kind of like, I think with Star Wars The Phantom Menace, when that came out, how everyone loved it when it first came out, but then people realised it was not good, and it was just their huge hype and stuff clouding their actual opinion. So I think it may be that. I honestly don't think in a few years' time this album will be getting the huge praise it's gonna get at the moment, or is getting through early reviews. So yeah, it's not really bad, but it's not great. Definitely, in my opinion, their worst album to date, and I hope they do something better with their next album. So yeah, I kind of rambled on there for a while, but I just had to get this out, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.